All right, 6 more verses in our step-by-step journey through the book of Hebrews, and just a kind of a devotional level to give us the big picture of this book, all leading up to our ability to go through the last few chapters of the book and be encouraged to this call to endure, to keep pressing on, to hold fast, to be faithful, to persevere, because Jesus is greater. And our 6 verses here fit right into that argument. It begins with the word therefore, which has become like a common word already so far in this book. Chapter 2 began with therefore. There was another therefore in verse number 14 of chapter number 2. And now again we find another therefore. So we're continuing just building this argument about who Jesus is, leading us to this imperative, this command, like we can hold fast. We can endure right now. Now, the argument here is, therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus. Think about Jesus. Focus on Jesus. Meditate on Jesus. And then it tells us 2 things about who Jesus is. He is the apostle and the high priest of our confession. Now, it might seem weird to call Jesus an apostle because we're familiar with the word apostle from like Paul's introduction of himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ. But apostle simply means sent one. So Jesus sends his disciples, and so they are apostles of Jesus. God sends Jesus, so he's an apostle of God. He's a sent one. And actually, verse number 2 alludes to that. He is faithful to the one who appointed him. And it also said that Jesus is the high priest. He's the intercessor. Now, we're supposed to consider Jesus, and there's a lot we could consider about Jesus, but it actually just gives us one aspect of Jesus we're supposed to consider. He is faithful to the one who appointed him. And then verse 2 throws us this curveball. Just as Moses was also faithful in all God's house. And the curveball is that we're supposed to be considering Jesus, focusing on Jesus, and then you throw in another individual to sidetrack us from considering Jesus. But I think this fits right into the argumentation of Hebrews that Jesus is greater. So if we're going to consider somebody faithful, he doesn't want the reason in the back of mind saying, yeah, Jesus is faithful, but that Moses guy was really faithful too in all that he did in leading the children of Israel and building up a house of God and the law. Moses was faithful for 40 years in the wilderness. And he says, wait a minute here. No, if we're going to consider Jesus as faithful, we need to understand that he is supreme in this faithfulness. Moses is part of the household of God. I think verse 5 shows it really clearly. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were spoken later. Moses is part of God's house. He's part of God's people. And he was a faithful servant, a faithful slave in that house of God. But Jesus is the architect of the house. He's the one that built the house. He's the author and finisher of our faith. So verse number 6 goes, but Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. So see, he's putting Moses and Jesus out there, and they're comparing him. And they could compare and saying, well, Moses he's a sinner. I mean, he got angry, and here's Jesus. He has righteous anger. He's holy. And Moses, he died. Jesus Christ, he died and rose again. But they don't go that comparison of like Moses negative, Jesus positive. It is Moses positive, Jesus greater. Moses, a faithful servant, a faithful slave in God's house to God's people. Jesus, the one who created the house. Jesus, faithful over God's house as a son. So just pause here and consider with me Jesus' faithfulness. Jesus is faithful to be born in a humble situation. Jesus is faithful with poverty. Jesus is faithful to the one who sent him, God the Father, in the midst of suffering. Jesus is faithful, having to have his house uprooted and hide away in Egypt because rulers are out to kill him. Jesus is faithful through temptation in the wilderness. Jesus is faithful with rejection. Jesus is faithful even through exhaustion as he falls asleep in the middle of a storm. And that's not the only time that happens. He's exhausted. He's human. Jesus is faithful through mocking. Jesus is faithful through pain. And Jesus is faithful to face his betrayer and feed him. Jesus is faithful to the one who sent him as he walks into Gethsemane to pray. Jesus is faithful to be falsely accused, to be mocked and beaten. Jesus is faithful to hang upon a cross and suffer and die. Jesus is faithful to feel the weight of God's rejection and God's wrath poured out because of my sin. Jesus is faithful to death. So consider Jesus' faithfulness. Now why? Well, verse number 6. And we are his house, his people. We are his people if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. So it is here's Jesus, consider his faithfulness. And then we hold fast. We have confidence. We have hope now in this Jesus. Now, I don't want us to hear verse number 6 as in hey, Jesus was faithful, so you go be faithful too. Kind of like, what would Jesus do? That's unfair. This verse is not just saying, hey, look, Jesus was amazing. He was faithful through all this, so now you go tough it out. You go be faithful too. Rah, you got it. Okay, that's like the teacher who walks in the classroom and like everybody failed the test except one person who aced it. And like they got all the answers in 5 minutes and had the rest of the time off. And the teacher gets up and said, like, guys, I think this test was not unfair. Look at Jimmy. Jimmy got 100. Okay, you guys could have passed this test too. And the whole class is sitting there thinking, well, Jimmy's IQ's off the charts. He could teach this class. He should be in college right now. Okay, that is not what this passage is saying. It's not saying, hey, look, Jesus was faithful, so come on, guys, do better. That's setting us up for failure. Jesus is God's Son. He's holy. He's perfect. He will be faithful. What it is saying, though, is the author and finisher of our faith, this great salvation, who Jesus Christ, he was faithful, and that Savior is in us. He is our hope. He is our confidence. Our hope and confidence and boasting is in a faithful Savior so that we will hold fast. This is the means by which I'll hang on today. This is the means by which I will hold fast today. I will endure today. I'll persevere. See, his faithfulness gives all of his people the confidence and hope to hold fast no matter what. So consider his faithfulness today. As we think through this endure, this persevere, it is possible because our hope, our confidence is not in us to hang on a little bit longer today. Our hope and confidence is because Jesus Christ has been God's faithful provision for my salvation. All right. Continue to take these bite-sized pieces to the book of Hebrews, getting ready for our study later on as we walk through the final chapters of Hebrews in a few months. God bless.